I'm Stacy Everhart, and today we have Kevin Wojtowicz and Brett Rosenhaus joining us today to talk a little bit about the Surety um, climate and how, best to get prepared. So Kevin became a partner with Nielson Hoover organization in 1997, and he has 30 years of experience. He's helped everyone in the Surety from startups to established contractors. And when he's not at work, which is almost always, you can find him playing golf or boating. We have some great places to boat here in Tampa, right? And then Brett is the managing partner of Nielson Rosenhaus and Associates. He has represented sub and general contractors in the 25 years of experience in the surety industry. And his skill set came into good use when Nielsen Hoover and Company decided to expand the businesses into the Orlando and St. Petersburg offices. He attended University of Florida, and he just recently moved to Lighthouse Point, Florida. That sounds pretty relaxing. So we're excited to have you, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Joining me today for this part of the presentation, just on a surety industry update, is two of my partners within the Nielson group, one being Brett Rosenhaus, who is also a surety bond specialist, and the other being Brandon Beane, who is an insurance specialist and risk management specialist. First, the first slide, the two phrases that probably best describe the surety industry today are excess capacity and a soft surety marketplace. The first slide probably provides why this is. This slide is a 35-year timeline of direct written premiums in the surety industry, which is the black line, and then the loss ratio on a percentage basis, which is the red line. Couple points of interest for those of us that are old enough to remember the 80s. You could see here the surety faced some tough times. A lot of this was the result of spillover from the saving and loan crisis, difficulties in the banking sector, and the interest rate swings. In the early 2000s, there was also another spike, and believe it or not, most of that spike was the result of two companies which you may remember. One was Enron and the other was Kmart. But as you can see down here, since 2005, 2006, the surety industry has been fairly successful. Excuse me about that. And typically, on average, anything less than 30% direct loss ratio constitutes a profit to the industry. So as you can see, since 2006, between 2006 and now, the surety industry, other than a slight spike, of course, 2012, with the Great Recession that we all face, has seen very low loss ratio, and very nice an increase in direct written premiums, therefore creating that soft surety marketplace. Another slide that will speak to this is the Surety and Fidelity Association of America publishes quarterly results for the top 100 underwriters of direct written premiums and also direct losses. Of interest of this slide, I only show the top 20 here, but if anybody wants any of the information that we talk about or some backdrop of information that we talk about, I'd be glad to just email Brett, myself, or Brandon. We'd be glad to give you anything y'all would like. But points of interest on this slide specifically for the most recent quarter, year over year, direct loss ratio is up from 18.1% to 20.9%. The direct written premium is about flat year over year. However, direct written premium for the top 25 largest underwriters is actually up about 25% year over year, with some surety companies with experiencing larger increase. Crum, for instance, is up 54.8%. Markel, Arch, and Argo are all up by in excess of 10%. But there are some reductions where HEC is down by 9%. The 5 topics that we are going to discuss today in this new world or post-COVID world from an underwriting consideration basis are financing and payment terms, delay damage and COVID-19 clauses, triple P loans and forgiveness, and subcontractor default insurance, subcontract bonds, supply bonds, and lastly, cybersecurity EPL, and posting and policy requirements. The first we're going to talk about is financing and payment, and for this, I'll turn it over to Brett.
Good morning, everyone. Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically what we're starting to see out there right now is more difficulty with a lot of the owners when it comes to financing. And one of the areas that we basically are stressing to everyone, especially both general contractors and subcontractors, is to try to make sure that they're confirming where the financing is coming from, making sure that the money's in place for jobs. And, you know, one of the best ways to do that, if you have a surety relationship, is to use your agent, use the surety as the bad guy. Because we've seen a number of projects which have gotten started. Some, you know, could be as little as a couple of $1 million into the tens of millions of dollars. And there's nothing wrong with confirming that the funding is in place. And you could do that simply by saying, look, I have a $50 million surety program, a $100 million surety program, and my surety requires, even though we don't have a bond, that the dollars are in place. So can you just show us where the money's coming from to the owner? So that's just one of the areas we're starting to see as trouble spots and that we're emphasizing to our clients. So that covers that topic, Kevin. Anything else?
Nope, I think that's it. Thanks, Brett. Next topic that we are starting to see, we've seen, I mean, obviously from delay and damage clauses, specifically, we would prefer to see liquidated damages and reasonable liquidated damages. One of the things of late, we've seen excessive liquidated damages within the contracts and subcontract agreements specifically. It is something that we just need to address early on. I always recommend as you're negotiating your contract or subcontract, if it's a contract with an owner or subcontractor with a GC, use your surety company as a resource as well. Allow them to maybe, potentially not maybe, but definitively read that contract or send them a copy. They may be able to provide some advice specifically before you sign it, as you do with your attorney as well, I'm sure in most cases. But a lot of times we're seeing some pretty excessive damage provisions currently within some of these agreements. And we like to get a head start on some of these. I mean, some of them are ridiculous. We've seen one of our flooring contractors had $1 million contract and they had $50,000 a day liquidated damages. Well, they were worth a couple $100,000. 4 days late, they're basically out of business. So, you know, we just have to take those things into consideration. And as with everything in life, everything's negotiable. So just something to look at a little closer. Also with the force majeure clauses, as you know, it's natural and unavoidable catastrophes, specifically that can affect job performance. Force majeure clauses specifically only buy us time, not other damages, but it is something that you should consider. We have an example of a good force majeure that does include the pandemic, epidemic wording, and even COVID-19 wording. If it's something somebody would like to see, once again, please email any of us, and we'd be glad to share that with you. And realistically, now is a good time with everything that's going on to get with your attorneys and look at your contracts. And I mean, and just maybe come up with a new form specifically, whether it's a specific subcontract bond form and just your contract that may address some of these updated damage provisions. It's important to the surety company because at the end of the day, the surety company is guaranteeing whatever that contract specifically says. The next topic, and I'll let Brett talk about it. I think it dates initially from a subcontract perspective. As we mentioned early on, it is extremely soft out there right now. I'll let Brett speak on some of the just mitigating factors that we have specifically. If you're a prime contractor and you want to bond your subcontractors, right now it could probably never be easier. And Brett, maybe you could talk about a few of the programs that we have from a subcontract basis.
Okay, so basically, when you go back maybe even 7 to 10 years, and you look at the surety marketplace. If you didn't have 3 years at least reviewed financial statements, you could not get a bond. That's changed significantly in the last 10 years. And what's happening is there are programs that are out there. Largest one that we've seen is maybe about $2 million in aggregate. But these days, from a subcontractor perspective, they can get it, and also general contractors. You could get bonded up to $1 million single bonds on internal statements. Now, it's meant more as a get you going program than a long-term solution. But there's credit-based programs where if a subcontractor or even a general contractor, if their credit's good, if we can justify the experience, you could get $500,000 bonds on credit alone. And I apologize, I said before $1 million. Actually, we could get single bonds up to about $1.5 million just on internal statements. So that's important from the larger general contractors who are trying to bond their subs and mitigate some of the risks, because and this is a little off topic, but we're just starting to see some stress on some of the subcontractor balance sheets with some of the COVID delays and the enhanced measures that have had to be put into place. And so there are ways to mitigate risk through times like this. So I think that's basically what that slide relates to.
Thanks, Brett. As I kind of mentioned in the last slide as well, too, and this is important with subcontract bond forms. Many of the surety companies have developed or devised what we want to call for subcontract bond forms that are EDR bond forms. Specifically, they expedite the dispute resolution. Some of the surety companies, which we have examples of as well, they specifically stipulate a point person within the claim department and a phone number and an email for such. So if you do have a problem or you're about to declare a contractor or subcontractor in default, or vice versa, you can call directly to the surety under claims department and get the ball rolling. And in a nutshell, basically, most of these forms would typically take weeks or months from a dispute resolution, may be able to reduce it to days or weeks. So once again, if you're interested, it may be a good time to look at some of these subcontract bond forms. We would be glad to share what we have with you. Please just email us and we would do such. Another thing right now in today's interesting COVID times, supply bonds. If you're a GC and you're purchasing your own materials, or even if you're a subcontractor and you're purchasing obviously your materials, maybe because of the disruption that we saw in March, April, and hopefully we don't see another one again. But who knows? But if it's a large ticket item, it's a really relatively inexpensive bond. But you may want to ask for a supply bond from your suppliers, guaranteeing that supply will be there on a timely basis. Just something to give consideration to. Lastly, and I'll let Brandon speak upon this because it's what he's seen from the subcontractor default insurance trends. Brandon.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Kevin. So
sure.
It's interesting. The insurance marketplace in general is an incredibly hard market. It's a hard market. Really in the last 10 months. Sort of the end of last year, we heard indications that the market was hardening in large part because of global, what the term that's used is nuclear verdicts, multi-billion dollar claims that historically would settle for, exponentially less than that they're getting resolved for today. So kind of the legal conditions and that macroeconomic force has created a very hard market in the insurance space, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But when it comes to subcontractor default insurance, the market is as robust and healthy as it's ever been. SDI has been around for years now. And for the first 15 years, there was one game in town, which was Zurich and their SubGuard product. Over the last 10 years, a variety of competitors have entered the marketplace. and they all sort of have their own niches. So AXA XL is the big dog. They support a lot of the premium large ENR 100 type accounts. They were really the first to emerge in the competition against Zurich, and they have a premium position. Beyond that, you have a whole array of other carriers that are playing in different spaces. So Berkshire Hathaway, for instance, has a very limited appetite. Their goal is to support their large surety accounts. And whereas most SDI buyers have deductibles from $500,000 to $1.5 million, Berkshire Hathaway has programs that have $5 million or $10 million deductibles. So they're really focusing on supporting the jumbo contractors. Liberty Mutual's entered the space over the last year. They're supporting it well with a variety of different types of target accounts, both large and middle market. Cove has been a very aggressive entrant, and they're one of the more flexible underwriters out there supporting more regional and middle market contractors. Hudson has a similar appetite. Arch and Zurich are both players to a limited extent in the space. So there's a very robust market for SDI, and it's become a product that a lot of contractors rely on for balance sheet enhancement. Many of our clients are adding, close to a point to their bottom line results by successfully running SDI programs. And one of the key pieces of running a successful SDI program is being free from losses. So the focus the last 10 years, and it evolves every year really, is on subcontractor pre-qualification. And there's more and more sophistication around the selection of and underwriting of, by underwriting, I mean the general contractor underwriting the subs going into their SDI program. So you'll see, back in the early days, underwriting was, would a guy like Kevin or Brett give them a letter of bondability? And if they would, which Brett will do all day, every day.
Every day.
Then that's a pre-qualified subcontractor. In the last 6 or 7 years, it's gotten to be you need to review audited financial statements as a contractor or have a vendor do it for you, and really underwrite the subcontractor with a surety mentality, because really you become the surety for all of your subcontractors when you use SDI. If you're taking $1 million in risk, $1.5 million in risk, you are the surety for these guys. So you need to understand if they're financially viable, and that evolution has happened, and it's been a successful one. And what's happened with that data is contractors have realized that the financial underwriting really ties into a more holistic view of the sub. So if you're looking at a financial statement on the front end during the bidding process, and you see that the subs, one, something as elementary as they don't have a financial statement, or they're using their cousin to do it, or QuickBooks, that's one category of sub, and you're going to have a different result with that sub in the field. You will with a more sophisticated CPA, a more comprehensive audit, and then obviously you get into the qualitative aspects of the numbers, and all of that translates into a different experience with the sub with regard to schedule, quality, safety, manpower, training. All of those things manifest themselves in the work, and SDI has driven that to a large part for a lot of large contractors, and you see great differentiation in the market with regard to contractors that adopt SDI, use it, and begin to better understand, the root of all these issues in the field, which is the financial strength of their partners. So in a lot of ways, it's SDI. There's never been a better time to enter the SDI space. I would also suggest to you that if you're working with somebody that uses SDI, or you're working with a sub that's working on projects that are covered by SDI, it's interesting to see, how things are managed. Some of my clients use SDI on all their jobs, and some of them bond very occasionally or never. Some of them bond a lot more frequently. So one of my clients, who I've actually served as their risk manager in the past, bonds about 30% of their subs under SDI, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Large subs that $100 million concrete package doesn't fit well into an SDI program with a $50 million limit. So that would be a reason to bond. Glass is a high risk business, supply chain issues, limited vendors, ability to supplement or swap mid-project. So glass often gets bonded. But then there are other guys that get bonded, and it's a reflection of performance concerns, reflection of concerns about the financial statements, or some combination thereof. So it's interesting if you're an observer of these things and have partners working in these spaces to start to identify those trends and maybe ask some questions about why things shake out the way they are. It's a pretty dynamic topic. It's evolving. I mean, the next kind of great frontier of SDI is better understanding schedule. So there's a thrust in that space driving more analytics around schedule. But it's a dynamic aspect of the business, and it's a healthy one right now. And I would encourage anyone that's interested in SDI. There's probably never been a better time to explore the space.
Thanks, Brandon. The next topic is triple P and loans and loan forgiveness. Hopefully most of you were able to obtain triple P funds. Right now from a surety industry, most of the sureties, we're fortunate enough to do business with 70 plus surety companies. So we've got our finger on the pulse of most sureties and how they're handling and how they're analyzing the triple P funds. I know Saltmarsh has a division specifically to help with the application process. So if you're not using them with the forgiveness application, please reach out to them and do so. But right now, as I mentioned, from an as allowed balance sheet analysis, most of the underwriters are showing the loan is long term. The key is just to communicate when you apply for the forgiveness and when you receive the forgiveness. Go ahead and take it off your balance sheet. Hopefully that debt, and just let your agent and let your surety company know, because obviously at this point when you get the money, it's long term, so it's working capital, which is a great thing. But it will also help your worth, obviously, when that is forgiven. So once again, as with anything in any surety relationship, communication just continues to be key. But hopefully most of you guys were able to obtain it. And from what we hear right now, and I think Mike will talk on a little bit later, but we're anticipating, expecting most of the loans to be forgiven. Another hot topic right now is posting and policy requirements. It's a good time, obviously, with COVID to update your policy requirements for both the job site and within the office. If there is a COVID incident, how do you handle it specifically, which is extremely important, especially when it comes to employment practices, which Brandon will touch on in a moment. But just a good time overall to start to consider and let your underwriter know, and let your surety company, and your agent know what you're doing. It's all about risk mitigation in our industry, and we're in the craziest, toughest industry. I always joke saying, contractors are crazy for doing it. We're twice as crazy for guaranteeing it. So, but we're in this together, and we all love doing it. So bottom line is the best we can do to mitigate our risk, the better, and the most that we communicate to the surety company and keep everything transparent and seamless, the better the relationship's going to be. The last topic is cybersecurity and insurance and employment practices liability. And Brandon, if you don't mind, if you could just touch briefly on these two items.
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned before, it's a very hard insurance market all of a sudden. There are a lot of to be determined at this point. Everything is incredibly fluid when it comes to COVID. And when you look at some of the EPLI stuff Kevin references, it's challenging as an employer to figure out which way is up and what the correct guidance is. In my experience, you need to stay current. You need to have good counsel, both formal and informal. on all of these issues, and make sure that you're protecting yourself and documenting things and acting in a consistent, clear fashion with that guidance. When it comes to cybersecurity, obviously there are operational things that need to be happening, and then there's insurance. And it's been a coverage that's been largely adopted the last few years, but it's certainly something that isn't universal at this point. Cyber insurance is still a new frontier. It's evolving all the time. Policies are very specific to different types of business. So as a construction company, you'll get an application and a policy form that addresses all sorts of things that have almost nothing to do with the construction industry, because it's still a very green field as far as insurance is concerned. It's still relatively expensive. There's plenty of capacity out there, and it's money well spent. Identity theft, phishing scams, all of these things have only ramped up in the COVID world. And they're often coming in under the guise of COVID guidance or COVID assistance. So investing in cyber liability and the appropriate cybersecurity mitigation techniques makes all the sense in the world. The dynamic that we're all struggling with is kind of what we're doing. Most people are like Kevin. They have no idea how to turn on the PowerPoint on a Zoom and find how to maintain the security protocols on their computer. Right? We're all struggling with remote work and the technology aspects of it. So an extra level of diligence and vigilance is really important. And I think the insurance world is going to help drive that a little bit, right? The underwriting of cyber liability involves lots of questions and protocols and underwriting around what we're doing to better manage these risks operationally. But it's certainly better to be in front of these issues than under the train as it rolls right over you. So it's a fluid space, and there are new challenges every day. But the insurance is widely available and still relatively inexpensive. EPLI, again, that's not obviously a greenfield insurance coverage quite the way cyber is, and it's going to be interesting to track the next couple of years, because people are making up their policies and procedures on the fly. There's a lot of lack of clarity. People have to change their policies and procedures on a fairly regular basis. I mean, we've all been challenged by the CDC's guidance around a lot of these coronavirus issues. Then that's further complicated or by political differences that seem to be impacting people's policy decisions and personal decisions on how they govern themselves at work. It's going to be a very, very challenging space for a while. So our recommendation is obviously make sure that you have plenty of insurance. Obviously review that coverage very carefully with your broker and make sure that you're not at risk and you understand the coverage. And then make sure your policies are widely distributed, clear, and enforced and are applied appropriately and equally. It's difficult because policies have to change as the situation evolves and changes. And different people are doing different things, and different people consider themselves at different levels of risk. Reach out to your advisors, reach out to legal counsel, and make sure you're doing the right thing, because this situation is going to get worse before it gets better.
Thank you, Brandon. That's really about all we have. If there's any questions, please, for Brett, Brandon, and myself. If not, I believe Nancy mentioned that a copy of the presentation will be available to anybody following all the presentations. And as I mentioned, if you need anything 24/7, we'd be glad to help. And obviously, from a general perspective, from a surety perspective, the best you could do is just that open communication with your underwriter. It's all about relationships, and especially even more so now. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Hey, Kevin, we did have one question in the chat. Carol asked, have you seen a slowdown with bidding opportunities and bonding needs since COVID? And are you expecting backlog to be impacted by this down the road?
Brett, you want to touch on that?
Kevin, I'm sorry. I thought have we seen a large impact on COVID? Is that the question, and an impact going forward?
Have you seen a slowdown with the bidding opportunities and bonding needs since COVID? And are you expecting backlog to be impacted?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think it depends on the area that contractors are working on. For example, Kevin and I and Brandon, we all work on the account, have one account that's probably doing revenues of about $800 million a year down in Palm Beach County, and when COVID hit, they were in a panic. We spoke to them the other day, and their backlog is back up above their previous plan. Now, they specialize in multifamily, some public work, and condos, but the condos have gone down quite a bit. Now, we have other contractors who are specializing, obviously, in the hotel world. Yeah, there's been a significant impact there, but we are all, those of you who are in Florida, we're all blessed with the fact that right now, I think the number's about 2,000 families a day that are moving to Florida. And I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to be blessed with a lot of construction activity here in Florida. And as far as the actual COVID impact, we're seeing some impact because of increased cost on the job as related to safety issues, the shutdowns that occur when there's a COVID case. But more of the impacts we're seeing are on the smaller subs, and delays and things like that. So hopefully that answers the questions.
So it seems like it's pretty industry specific. If you're in the hotel and maybe mall business, now's not a great time for you. But if you're building warehouses, might be a good time, or townhomes.
Yeah, the biggest area we've really seen is the hospitality. There is some on retail, but a lot of the retail, the malls and so forth, they're being torn down and repurposed for different projects. So no, the main area we're seeing is hospitality. And of course, we expect that to come back as soon as there's a vaccine, at least from a Florida perspective or a Southeast perspective.
That's great. Thank you. Mike would like to know what your thoughts on the ability of state and local governments to fund construction with the disruption of tax revenues.
That's a great question, Mike. There is a lot that I mean, we're in the middle of obviously the election season from so many different perspectives. And obviously our largest tax base is that hospitality revenue, as we talked about, which is in a steady decline. It's something that we all need to be cognizant of. I mean, from a general perspective, diversification seems to be key. And I mean, we talked about underwriting when Brett talked about financing from a private side. It's such a good point. I mean, we have to start underwriting from a public side. Do they have the ability and do they have the money available for the construction projects? So it's something we continue to monitor closely. It's something we may be dealing with in the not too distant future. But as of right now, everything, as Brett mentioned before, we're pretty positive. This is a major speed bump that we're all dealing with, but depending on, I mean, whatever direction the election goes, whatever political side you're on, I mean, I firmly believe at the end of this, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to bolster the economy. We're going to do it federally. We're going to do it locally. We're going to do it from a state perspective. We got to get people working. What better way to get people working is the construction industry? They will find the money. If they can't find the money, they're going to print the money. So realistically, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And right now, obviously, the interesting thing that we are seeing, maybe because of that diversification, you'll have a $2 million fire station, which, 3 or 4, 5, 6 months ago, there may have been 5 bidders. We had one 2 weeks ago, there was 22 bidders. So there are people out there right now. There's more bidders. There's more people scrambling for work. So it's going to be interesting times. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball. And as a contractor, we have to look 6 to 9 months ahead of now from a forecasting measure and what we're bidding now to come to fruition. So realistically, there's a lot that's going to be and a lot of unknowns. But as Brett said before, we feel pretty confident. I don't think I'd want to be a contractor in New York City right now that specializes in office buildings. Wouldn't want to be a contractor maybe that specializes in any public work in the state of New York or in California. But I mean, in Florida, in the Southeast, we look pretty good. And we feel pretty confident and comfortable. And right now, most of our clients feel the same way, and most of the surety companies do as well. So onwards and upward.
That's great advice. It's always good to diversify so that you limit those kinds of risks.
Yeah, and Stacy, I've got one more question. Kevin, you just made a great statement there about seeing the increased competition on smaller jobs. What do you think? Do you think margins are going to start to be impacted on work that's going to come on the books in 2021 and 2022 with the increased competition and the unknown factor of how much stuff is going to cost when you go to order the material and whether it's available?
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. Yeah, we most of our clients, we do get, depending on the size of the job, but we do get some sort of job cost breakdown. We haven't seen an erosion of profit yet on the balance sheet, and luckily, and knock on wood, most of the financial statements, we get semi-annual financial statements. Most of the 630 financial statements are now in. Especially great clients that are with Saltmarsh, because you guys do such a good job with your clients. But specifically, we haven't seen an erosion as of yet. But great point. I don't know that increased competition definitively probably is going to eventually start to drive down profits. Just supply demand. So something we need to keep a close eye on, as you mentioned, especially because the additional risk we're taking on right now. I mean, the margin should be increasing, and at least the contingencies should be increasing for those variable reasons that we have no control over as far as what can happen. So, but so far we have not seen profit deterioration.
All right, and a question from like an owner's perspective. I've got. We do a lot of work with developers and whatnot, and are we seeing the subdivision development, commercial development for the city? I mean, we've seen development bonds, things of that starting to come out in the marketplace to guarantee the completion of projects. I know a lot of local governments will get into a public-private partnership with folks on developing a section of downtown, and how would they go about protecting themselves from getting paid, and a contractor that may not normally look at a bond for like a home builder. Home builders don't usually look at bonds, but are we starting to see subdivision bonds become a big thing?
Yes, good question, Mike. Definitively. I mean, they've been around. I mean, we look at it, they're fairly hazardous bonds in the industry when you talk about subdivision or completion bonds, because they're very much forfeiture in nature. If it's the guaranteeing of a completion, as you mentioned, of a subdivision or the infrastructure thereof. The issue from the municipality's perspective is, the three parties, if you have the developer, you have the contractor, and you have the municipality, and the municipality agrees to give them the plat based upon infrastructure improvements being completed. The county does, or the city, they don't care where the money comes from in most cases. In this type of, they care. They know the money's there. Obviously, the lender, wherever it's going to be from the developer, hopefully they have the money. But the completion bond guarantees them the infrastructure completion in that example. So at least they know it's going to be done. So they're fairly hazardous in nature, Mike. In the industry, I say more hazardous than a payment performance bond, only because they're more forfeiture in nature. If it's not completed, the surety company's going to get you to get in there and complete it. They don't really have a defense, or they're going to just write a check basically for the completion thereof and hand it over to the obligee. So we are seeing more, and with the increased growth and the private growth, there are a lot of subdivision bonds that we are providing, or completion bonds in nature that we do provide. We are specialists in the development and subdivision arena as well too. As you mentioned, even a home builder that may need, obviously, they want to develop their own subdivision. Yes, most of the municipalities are asking for some sort of completion bond. Many of the different counties have their own bond forms. We have most of those in a database, but yes, we are here to help any home builder or anybody else. And even if a home builder wants to just learn about bonding, I mean, in any way, shape, or form, or start to bid some commercial work or some public work, we'd love to help them out. We'd love to help you out.
So Carol's wondering what the bonding capacity or criteria is for when underwriters want the contractor's final statements to be audited or reviewed by a CPA. She clarifies a little bit that we've seen a lot of our clients upgrading to a review or an audit in this last year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Brett mentioned one of the things is it's kind of one of those double-edged swords. This is in my opinion. Typically, when I first got into business 30 years ago, if you did over $1 million, you had to do a reviewed financial statement. If you wanted over $1 million in capacity, I could say. As Brett mentioned earlier, we do have some programs that will do much more on that than that now. I believe it's always a good point. I mean, anything over a couple $1 million, you should at least be doing an annual review, do a interim compiled statement with your CPA, do quarterly work in processes, just to keep your bond line seamless and unlimited. All of our contractors that we end up picking up, just so everybody knows, do have unlimited bonding capacity, regardless of the financial strength, but just so they know that with the surety partners that we have in place with them, but not being facetious. But I think, it really is, and it's up to the individual contractor as well. The sureties don't really dictate, specifically. A lot of times the increase to an audit is because of a pre-qualification measure, or just a lot of our clients just like the ability to be able to present an audited financial statement to when they're marketing their business or whatever it may be, or just the peace of mind they get by receiving a full audit specifically. So the surety company, anything over a couple $1 million, typically it's going to be a review. It used to be $100 million definitively needed to do an audit, but it just depends on an individual case by case basis. Do you have anything more to add on that, Brett?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, it depends on the spread of risk, the type of work, the amount of bonds required relative to the unbonded work, the surety. Surety is very subjective. But I agree with, doing reviews, even if the bond needs aren't great right now, when that job that comes out that's 2, 3, 4 times larger than the biggest job that a contractor's done in the past, it's extremely helpful to have the reviewed track record going back a couple of years.
Well, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions? Any last minute questions?
Yeah, I've got one more, Stacy. In this era of cooperation with, you see more and more joint ventures that are out in the marketplace, where a larger general and a smaller general or a couple subs will get together and go after a job that's maybe a little bit bigger than either one of them could do individually. What are some of the surety risks for getting into that JV type arrangement? I mean, is that something that they should be, who's responsible for bonding that?
Well, typically, yeah. You want me to address this, Brett?
I'll take it. I enjoy this one. Kevin and I find this really interesting, because what we'll do with a lot of the surety companies, and I think it's the right way to do it, is it will get contractors. Let's say one of our average guys doing 25 to 40 million a year in revenues. And let's say they're the local guy and you get a much larger guy come in from out of state or out of area and they talk about doing a joint venture. From a surety perspective, the sureties just look at it and say, okay, we're really looking at, let's call them an 800-pound gorilla, the larger contractor. And the way we try to get the incumbent surety for the smaller contractor to look at it is, hey, okay, this guy doing 40 million a year has a balance sheet of 2.5 million in equity, whatever the number may be, 1.5 million. But the partner has a balance sheet of 30, 40, 50 million dollars in equity. And when it comes to indemnity on joint ventures, it's joint and several. So one of the things that have come about maybe the last 8 to 10 years is kind of trying to keep this off the backlog with a wink and a nod for the smaller contractor, because you've got the bigger contractor there, which gives the additional capacity instead of it wiping out the capacity of the smaller guy. So I think that's how we view it, and that's how we try to get the sureties to view it.
Thank you so much, Kevin and Brandon, for your presentation, and we appreciate it.